welcome to this week's edition of Real Talk, where on Sunday nights we feature a kind of a mini course or a really helpful topic to educate you on real topics, real issues, and real solutions in the in-home childcare world. We try and bring you information that's relevant to parents, to nannies, to newborn care specialists, to postpartum doulas, and really anybody who works with children in a home setting. And tonight we have a wonderful guest that I'm excited to have on. She's actually one of our company's own independent instructors and helps create a whole new program that we have. She created the entire curriculum and we worked together to get this on air and for her to share her expertise. So it was really fabulous to have that. She is the author and creator of our Respectful Care program. And Danielle's experience with infants, children, and teenagers spans more than 3 decades. And I love being able to draw on that as a resource for you because she has so much to share. You can read her full bio in our feed, but tonight's topic is one I'm really excited to share with you because these questions come up a lot. And sometimes there aren't easy answers. Sometimes it's not a quick and fast solution that solves this and makes everything better. And so Danielle's going to give us some really great tips and suggestions based on her years of experience in working in this industry. If you have questions during this, please put them in the feed. If everything works right, technically, we'll follow along and try and answer them during this session. But if for some reason we run out of time or whatever, Danielle will come back and answer those in the feed for you after the fact. Also, please be sure that if you answer or ask questions and are looking for answers after this live is over, that you tag Danielle in that, or you tag Newborn Care Solutions so that we can tag Danielle in order to get you those answers. So first off, welcome, Danielle. I'm really excited to have you tonight.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I'm really excited to be on. I was sort of asking around people, thinking, what would be a great topic, and this just comes up so often. We don't have a lot of regulation in our industry, and there are pluses and minuses to everything. And there are a lot of pluses to that. There are also some minuses. And to me, the biggest minus is that we don't have clear-cut answers for a lot of these really important questions. And the reason these questions are important is because they really matter to us as professionals, to us as the breadwinner for our families, for earning our own livelihood. They matter to us for our self-concept as a professional and the type of care that we offer for our clients. They matter to our clients because we are caring for the very most important thing that has ever happened in their life or will ever happen, which is their children. So there's a lot of really big feelings and really big meaning around these questions. So that's why I thought I would just sort of touch on some of these really specific issues that come up in our field.
Right. And what Danielle is referring to, what we're really going to kind of look at tonight is what are our ethical responsibilities as newborn care specialists, as postpartum doulas, as in-home childcare providers, really, when we face difficult situations. And we're not talking about the whole broader spectrum of our field. That was a great topic that we had with Alexandra a couple of weeks back, and you can find that on our website. If you go to the education tab and then click through, it will go to where you can find that and still watch it. But we're going to talk more specifically tonight, really kind of direct about how do we deal with difficult situations in the workplace, meaning how do we deal with challenging clients and how do we deal with challenging coworkers? So I was really excited when Danielle said, hey, I think this is a good topic to talk about because, man, I get this question a lot. And I know you get it a lot too, Danielle. And yeah, and people just really could use that insight and that information. So what I want to talk to you about first is kind of what do we do when a client is disrespectful to us? And I would love when we talk about that, if you could give us a couple of different examples of how they are disrespectful and kind of how we should handle that.
Sure. Yes, this is something that can come up in any kind of relationship, including a professional business relationship, especially when you are in somebody else's home.
Mhm.
Because when we come in our field as professionals, we aren't coming into a setting where we're working with other professionals. If
Mhm.
you work in, a traditional office type job, most of the people that you're interacting with are also working an office type job, and you have meetings
Mhm.
with other people during their professional time. And there's a certain expectation that you have for the way the person is going to be dressed, the way the person is going to be talking to you, how much sleep they've had or they haven't had, all of these things. You have a pretty common understanding. When we come into someone's home, especially if we're coming in as an NCS or postpartum doula, we're coming into the most intimate moments of this family's life when a new
Yes.
baby has been born. And so if the birthing parent is present, then you have a whole lot of hormones and things going on from pregnancy. Those are huge. Even if the birthing parent's not present and it's a case of an adoption or a surrogacy situation, you have all kinds of postpartum things happening with that parent or those parents. And it's really important to be sensitive to the biological fact of what's happening and the psychological implications of
Mm.
those biological facts. So those hormones and those shifts and things that have happened physiologically and psychologically leave them very vulnerable. Plus, they have a brand new baby who doesn't sleep. And as we all know, it's always harder to regulate yourself when you haven't had enough sleep.
Yeah.
So, regardless of the fact that anytime you're supporting a family in home, you are in their home and they are in their personal mode, which is
Mhm.
appropriate. You are in your professional mode. When we're talking about supporting postpartum families, you also have to realize that they're in their home and they're completely vulnerable. So, the first thing that I would say about when a client treats you disrespectfully is look at the big picture, which can be hard when we also haven't had enough sleep. But as a professional, we can train ourselves to think, take a deep breath in, let it out, and say, is the client saying this because they haven't had enough sleep? Is the client saying this because maybe they had an appointment with a pediatrician today and they received some news that was distressing? Is the client saying this and they keep saying this every day, and I'm starting to wonder if they're maybe having some postpartum mood instability? Maybe this is something that I can gently ask them about and sort of help them figure out if they want to be referred to qualified mental health support. So that's the first thing I would say is when you experience something that it feels disrespectful, first of all, think about the big picture, and try to see whether it is intended as being disrespectful.
Mhm.
So in most cases, we are very sensitive to the fact that impact is more important than intent.
Mhm.
But in this particular context of this relationship, especially with postpartum families, it's important to give them the benefit of the doubt because you're coming in as the professional to their life as a person in their personal life in their home, usually in their bedroom, in their bed, while somebody might be breast or chest feeding a baby and half naked.
Mhm.
This is a very, very personal situation. So it's okay for us as professionals to take a moment and wonder about intent.
Right.
And that is not in any way diminishing the importance of impact versus intent in our general interpersonal relationships and interactions. But in this context of coming in as a professional to someone's personal space, we can look at what does the intent look like. So that's a really important starting place. And I would say that in my personal experience with postpartum families, I think 99.99% of the disrespectful things were not intentional.
Mhm.
They were related to a lack of sleep. They were related to hormones. They were related to shifting psychological awareness of oneself as a parent, which is a whole different topic. The development of an adult into a
Fun.
parent, something that our culture does not even recognize, but
Right.
it's a thing. So those are where those things come
Mhm.
from. Because in that situation, they really are desperate for our help. They really need us, and they really do want and appreciate us being there.
Mhm.
Sometimes things that really come across and you think, well, it sounds like they meant it. It often is coming from a place of perinatal mood anxiety disorder. As you mentioned, as I think it was in the foundational course, we talk about that any parent can experience perinatal mood instability or need support. Any gender, any identification, birthing parent, non-birthing parent, does not matter.
Mhm.
Anyone in that context can experience those. So even if you say, oh, well, the mother is the birthing parent and the father's the one having, a psychological challenge here. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Be open to and understand that that can also be the case. So that's the first thing that I would say. When the client treats us disrespectfully, let's look at it in that big picture and understand that many of the times in our particular field, that's what's going on.
Right.
When you perceive that the client really is treating you in a way that's disrespectful, like you have set a boundary very clearly and they are violating that boundary, and then you have reminded them and they're violating it again, That can be really hard because it can feel really frustrating. It definitely feels disrespectful. It feels insulting. One thing that can be really helpful is to use some sort of higher level, ninja level communication skills. And so when the client says something to you, so for example, you have certain hours that you're available and you're not available at other hours, and they're asking you to stay late, or they're, expecting you to stay late. You could be making you stay late. They don't come back in time to take over with the baby for you to be able to leave. Is to, when they say it, say, I hear you're asking me to stay after the time that I'm available, and I'm not able to do that. And then stop and wait. So that communication technique is very effective, because then you are putting all of the burden back on them, which in that case, it really needs to be all on them, because they are the one who is not following it. And, they might say, oh my gosh, I thought you were on until 7 p.m. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Right? Or they might be like, darn, I was trying to, but you at least then will know where they are coming from. You're not telling them, you're such a jerk, I can't believe you're asking me to stay past the time. You're giving them the benefit of the doubt, but you're still mirroring back to them what they have done and said in a calm and firm and neutral way. And you're putting the ball back in their court for them to respond as they will. Sometimes it can be really frustrating when we are working with coworkers who can be difficult. There are a lot of different dynamics that happen in homes and in people who work in homes. And oftentimes different people were hired from different sources. Some might be from an agency, some might be not from an agency, all this. And so there's a lot of potential for political thinking. We as professionals are not coming in with that thinking. If I'm coming into a home, even as a fully staffed home, and they have 10, 15 other people there, all that matters to me is my relationship with the principals and my relationship of reporting with anybody else on the staff. If I report to the house manager, then that matters to me. If I, coordinate a schedule with a chef for the child's meals, then that matters to me. The rest of it is not a part of my purview. But a lot of other people who work in homes have an established hierarchy. They're not sure how you fit into it, and it can feel really uncomfortable. So in a situation when you have coworkers, whether it's a staffed home or it's, another NCS on the shift with you, the most important thing is to, again, give them the benefit of the doubt and calmly, neutrally reflect back to them what you're hearing. Because they honestly might be mistaken. They might have an idea about your job description that's completely inaccurate. They might think that it was your job to do something that your contract says you don't do. Or they might think it's not your job to do something that your contract says you do. So it's really important to open the dialogue in a way that's neutral and welcoming, so that you're opening it up to them. You say, it sounds like you're feeling frustrated because I'm sterilizing the baby's bottles. If they've gone off on you for doing this. And they might say, yes, that is supposed to be my job. You say, oh, now in my contract, it says that I sterilize the bottles. But, if you're sterilizing them and the parents are okay with that, I'm fine with letting you do that. Right. And that could be the resolution of the problem. Because very often what happens, especially if you're coming in, again, as an NCS or a PPD, and you're coming in temporarily during the postpartum period, people might feel like you're stepping on their toes. And you can understand how they might feel that. And you're coming in as a special different person, and you have a different job description. And then people who thrive in an organized hierarchical system, which many households are, even if they only have 1 or 2 employees, they might feel uncomfortable. So you can use that same technique to look at the big picture, see where it might be coming from, if it's even worth addressing. Because it's not. Yeah. If you decide it is worth addressing, then you can approach it in that way where you calmly and neutrally open it up to them and say, it sounds like there's an issue here. And then let them respond with whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So related to that kind of leads beautifully into my next question for you. And this is kind of personal to me, because I do this. I go do fill-in work. I do relief work for people. So, and I'm really careful about how I handle things, and I'm very intentional. Plus, I'm very careful about who I work with. Yeah. I want that transition to be smooth and easy. So I like to work with people who do things similarly to how I do, right? But not everybody has that option, or not everybody's in that circumstance. So what do you do? If you're the lead newborn care specialist and I'm coming in to relieve you so you can be off for a week or you can have a couple nights off, whatever it is, I'm coming in to relieve you, or we're working a split shift, but you're the lead person. How do you handle it if I come in and try and take over?
That's a very good question. Yes, unfortunately, that does happen. Again, this is one of the downsides of having a field that's not heavily regulated, is that there is the potential for that to happen. And sometimes even the client decides that they would rather have the fill-in person than the lead person. And very often that's because of things that the fill-in person says or does or doesn't say or doesn't do in a meaningful way. What's this? Okay, so this comes down to really just super basic ethical behavior. Having integrity. So for me, integrity, it comes from the Latin word integer, which means whole. So having integrity is being a whole person. And it means having what you think and what you say and what you do be in harmony. So you're not having a disconnect and separating out what you think and then you're saying and doing something different. And you're not thinking and saying one thing and doing something different. You're all together whole as one person. That's what integrity is for me. You're coming from this whole place, and so people can count on you, and people can understand that when you act, that what you're thinking and what you're saying are consistent with that and are in keeping with that. So one of the most important ways that we communicate what we're thinking and that we execute actions is through our contracts.
Right.
So when you are a person of integrity and you are working in our field, you must have a contract in order to communicate that and in order to be that whole person, because otherwise people, your clients and your coworkers can't know what your thoughts and your words and your actions are if you don't have it documented. That's the way we communicate in our field. We have a super basic level of like following the laws, and that's a really important part of integrity too. If you are breaking the laws, that's obviously a sign of not being a person of integrity, because you need to work in accordance with the laws, and you need to, have your basic standards, the duty of care to taking care of another person's child, which a court of law would always recognize we have a higher duty of care than the parents of the child. But beyond that, the contract is the place where we communicate that. So when it comes down to being the lead and a fill-in or a supporting caregiver, it's really important to have it clarified in the contract. That makes it a lot simpler, because then even if the client decides that they want the fill-in person instead, you have something in your contract to cover that. So if you say what happens, because, babies being born is never fully predictable. So somebody's finishing up a contract and then the next babies come 4 weeks early and they still have 2 weeks left on this contract. And so they have someone who's a fill-in to fill in for the first 2 weeks with the new client. And then suddenly the client wants to stay with the person that they already know. Well, fair enough. That's fine. But in the meantime, I've turned down other jobs for this job. So in my contract, it needs to have something that says, if we should find the need for a relief caregiver or a substitute caregiver, and you wish to go with the caregiver, you have some provision. Either you get to keep the retainer, or you get a 1-month fee or something to recognize the fact that you committed to this family and you kept your schedule clear in a way that was reasonable. You allowed a certain amount of time for the babies to be born early. The baby was born earlier. It happens. I totally understand if the client wants to stay with a person that they already know. I get that, especially after 2 weeks. They're like, oh, I've just, we're barely starting to, get our bearings here. But there has to be some kind of recognition for the person who sacrificed other opportunities for that timeline. And the contract is the place for that to be laid out. Right. Because the thing is, there's no one right answer to this. It's going to depend on the lead caregiver and the relief caregiver. And that's something that they can agree on together. And in one case, it might be 1 month. In another market, it might be 1 week fee, depending on how quickly they are likely to be able to pick up another assignment. So there's not one clear answer that we could have a regulation that says every time you have a contract, this is the appropriate fee. But the idea that you have something in your contract recognizing that this was your client originally and that you sacrificed other opportunities and said no to other jobs for that timeline, and now they want to go with this other person, that's fine, as long as you get something in return for it and you don't feel cheated.
Absolutely. So a more subtle version of trying to take over. So I'm just filling in for a week. But what if I come in and I say to your client, if Danielle's been doing it this way, but if we did it this way, we might get better results. Or if I come in and undermine what you've been doing and destroy things, how do you as a newborn care specialist, A, handle that with the client,
Mm-hmm.
and B, if it's me that's doing it, how do you handle that with me?
Those are really good questions. Well, if it's you, Tanya, I would want to know what your suggestions are, because probably you'd be right now. No, so okay, so two parts of it. So if the relief caregiver is coming in and making different suggestions and undermining the competence of the primary caregiver, that's a really unfortunate situation, because it is, when I hear something like that, what I hear is that person's telling me a story about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So they feel that they're not competent and that their competence doesn't show through enough. And so they feel the need to take other people down to try to make themselves look better. But the thing is, to anyone who knows that they're telling a story about themselves, it doesn't work. So if I came back after being gone for, say, that week, and I noticed that something was different, or the client wanted to do things differently, first of all, I'm open to that. If they want to do things, we come back and they're like, "Oh, we switched to doing it this way." I'm like, "Okay, we go along with it." If they, question me, it would be, I guess the one question would be, how would you find out? If the client came to you and said, "Oh, I'm really concerned because, this person said that this isn't the way to do it and that there's this other way," my response, from being a whole person and having my thoughts and my words and my actions be consistent, would be, there are a lot of different ways to do it. And some people think that has the best effect. I was advocating for this one because the American Academy of Pediatrics supports this one, but we can definitely do it that way if you want to, or whatever the relevant reason was.
Right.
More often than not, it would be because we talked about it, and this is the one that seemed to be most likely to achieve your goal. But we can definitely try that one, and it might work. Each human being is unique and unrepeatable, your child and you, and maybe this other thing will work better for your child. So dealing with the client, I would just talk about the content of it. I would reassure them about where my expertise was coming from and what I was advising to do. When it comes to the other coworker, I definitely would not hire them again to be my reliever. I would probably communicate with them and say, the client was mentioning your concerns about the way we were doing this, and so we talked about it and decided to do X, Y, Z. And then let them respond and see what they say.
Right.
Again, just put it back. Yes, I know what you said and did, and I've taken care of it with the client, and we're good.
It's amazing.
And
It's amazing how doing exactly that, when you wait and you let them respond, a lot of times they will fill that empty space, because it makes people very uncomfortable. And a lot of times you can get to the bottom of it very, very quickly. Now, that's not something I would ever do. I have had clients say to me, "So Danielle's been doing it this way. What do you think about that?" And my response is always, "You know what? I think Danielle is who you have hired to do this job, and is who you have put your trust in. And she knows your family and your baby much better than I do. So I think the best thing we possibly could do is follow Danielle's plan. And if you have any questions or concerns about what she's doing, that's a discussion to have with Danielle. And then if you and Danielle feel like bringing me into the discussion is beneficial, then I'm happy to help if I have anything to offer. But my guess is that the plan she's created for you is the best one for your family." And I have had people ask me that, and I've had it happen more than once, especially if I'm filling in for one of my students, because they automatically think that because I'm the instructor, I know more. And that is not the case. Many times, students who've been doing this for a while and have gained solid experience, they know more. If nothing else, they know more about that specific situation than I do.
Right.
And
they've been there for many more hours and days and nights. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and anything else that you would suggest around that kind of thing? Because I know that's a big concern for a lot of newborn care specialists and postpartum doulas, even.
Yeah, I do think, again, it's important if you're going to, initiate a dialogue about it is, again, we start by looking at the bigger picture and say, was there maybe something precipitating it? Like the client asking them, what do you think? Blah, blah, blah. What do you usually do when, whatever? Because it's possible that the client took it a little bit out of context and asked them a direct question and they answered it with a simple answer. And then the client was like, oh, she said what you did it wrong. Could be intentional, could be unintentional, doesn't really matter. It's a misunderstanding.
Right.
And so if if I'm not sure about the circumstances, I would lead with that. I'd be like, hey, the client said this, whatever, and then wait. And if the person's like, yeah, the client kept asking me what I thought about absolutely everything. Then I'm like, okay, I get it. I get it. They are just asking the question because they have a person there who has the knowledge and they don't realize that changing the baby's routine is not going to be in anyone's best interest.
Exactly.
And I think and parents don't.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that that's legitimately the case a lot of times is they just think, oh, here's another expert. Let me use some questions and, see what I can find out and learn. I do think that their intention is good. I don't think it's a bad intention. And I think
it's very rare that someone's actually trying to undermine you.
Exactly. And so given these things and a lot of the other circumstances, you acknowledged in the beginning, and I think that was so important, that a lot of times the postpartum period is a very challenging period for families to adapt to something they've never been in before, whether it's their first child or it's their second or their third or their fourth or that set of quads that was just born down in Texas. Like, gotta get my hands in there. But anyway, it's one of those things that each child changes the dynamic. It's a new situation. They have things to learn. And I love that you brought that up. So lots of things can happen. Lots of challenges can be there. And everybody is sleep deprived. How do we, as professionals, sleep deprived professionals, no matter what we know, we're sleep deprived too. And we know that sleep deprivation is literally a form of torture.
Yes.
It is used all around the world as a form
because it works.
Because it works, right? So we know that. And we know from all the studies on brain science, the impact that it has on the brain. How do we stay professional and continue to think clearly in the middle of all that?
That is, of course, the $64,000 question. So there are a number of techniques that we can use. One is just to train ourselves. There's a little bit of almost like a cognitive behavioral technique that when you feel your blood pressure rise and that rush of coming up in your body, when you feel insulted or outraged or frustrated or upset, go. Because when you take a slow, deep breath, your amygdala, which is the part of your brain that takes care of fight or flight or freeze, says, oh, there's no lion about to kill me because I wouldn't be breathing gently if there were a lion about to kill me. And it turns off. And then you have access to your upstairs brain again. So just a simple, slow, deep breath, especially if it's in through your nose and out through your mouth, but any slow, deep breath will help calm that down and give you access to this upstairs part of your brain where you can say, okay, what have I decided to do? I've decided that first I'm going to look at the big picture. Okay, so, oh yeah, no, nobody in this house has slept for 2 nights because, the baby, I don't know, was up every half an hour to nurse something.
He doesn't know days from nights yet.
Doesn't know days from nights. It's whatever. Okay, yeah. And then suddenly you're like, oh yeah, I'm good. So you have to train yourself to recognize the feeling inside, which is just a part of being a human being. There's nothing wrong with having that feeling. And it's not like that feeling isn't going to happen. When you're sleep deprived, that feeling is going to happen. They're going to say something and you're going to be like, what? But as soon as you feel that, think, okay, breathe. Okay, what's the big picture here? Yeah, everyone's sleep deprived. I'm just going to go on with my day.
Yeah. And I think thinking about these things ahead of time.
Yes. This is a plan you make. Exactly. Yes, you're right. It's something you plan ahead of time. It's a habit that you deliberately create and nurture, that when you start to feel that feeling, instead of letting it keep going, you stop and you take a deep breath instead. Another thing you can do is you can turn to your village, your partner, your friends, your colleagues, your, sister, brother, NCS, whoever it is that you're close to remind you, whoever it is that you can vent to. When you vent, they can say, while they're still hearing you, see, I hear you're really upset. What's the big picture here? And help remind you it's okay to be upset. And remember, you wanted to look at the big picture. And that can help you create that habit of looking at things and putting it into perspective.
Right. Yeah. I think about it in terms of, we'll go here. I think about it in terms of diving.
Yeah, of course.
Right?